X58. This is the motherboard that is my personal favorite. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I came into a bastion of X58 boards recently when I did a parts hunt and I found 3 PCs that were just pretty much untested. They were really just ready to go in the bin, and I got them for a really good deal, and then I pulled the motherboards out. 2 of which, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I'm reselling because they are really good X58 boards. One of them now, which is a mediocre X58 board, we're gonna be using in today's build. Now this build is going to be what I would call a bit of a compensator build, where we've got the i7 6-core, we've got the GTX 1070 8GB. So on the spec sheet, it's looking pretty good. And it's gonna be one of those builds that compensates for, say for instance, you got a small USB dongle. So basically with X58, it was the first generation of i7, that's when you first got hyper-threading. But even to this date, you can still get a lot more performance out of this architecture, especially if you overclock it. And that's what we're going to be doing today with this i7 970. You can expect an extra 30 to 40% performance, and also if you tune and tweak it, you can even get more performance after that, which we'll all be doing later in this video. But speaking of X58 motherboards, there is a tiered list. I like to say that the more desirable boards, which 2 of them were, we had an EVGA for the Win SLI3 and also a X58 Asus Deluxe. So what you're looking at here is you really want to use, say, motherboards like this that are mediocre. They can still do the job, they can still overclock well, but they're not that desirable on their own. And so this is the motherboard that we're going to be putting in today's build. Yes, it does need a bit of cleaning, but when it comes to X58 motherboards, basically the best thing you can do is look at the capacitors. Straight up, quite simple to see how good that motherboard is, the integrity of it. Have a look around the board, and the first thing you'll see with the caps is if they have flat tops on them, then it still means that they've got a lot of good life left in them. But also on that note, you can see if the board has generally been overclocked hard or it hasn't. So a lot of the times with X58, the reason why the boards still last for so long is that they were designed so well, but also on top of that, a lot of people got these boards and because they were over-engineered and they were engineered for real high-end overclocking, a lot of people simply didn't overclock them. So the life that's left in these boards is still a lot. Though of course another reason why I like X58 is triple channel memory. Even though we're using older DDR3, it's not as fast as DDR4, that triple channel does make up some of the lost speeds compared with DDR3 versus 4. So triple channel, we've got 12 gigabytes of RAM being thrown into this build. We're also using a 1 terabyte hard drive for backup, and now that SSDs have come back down in price, we can use a 120 gigabyte SSD for the main OS drive. Now speaking of the coolers, if you manage to find these old Noctua coolers, I find that they last so long and they work so well. The fans as well, I've only ever come into 1 faulty fan in the history of using Noctua parts, but that was on a really old and filthy build. And I'd say the fan really didn't fail on its own. It probably had some external force like Darth Sidious or someone dropping coffee on the fan, and then it probably caused it to fail, because I just don't believe that the Noctua fan's gonna go out on its own. And for the last components, we've got a VS550. We've put that on a power supply tester. It's given out some great signals, which means it's still good to go. And then for the case, which is one of the most important parts of a build, believe it or not, we're using one of these tempered glass RGB bangers with 4 fans installed and a controller. And the controller is important on older builds, especially like X58, where you don't have any RGB headers. So that in total, I'll put the price of this whole build up on the screen for you guys. But with that aside, let's build this thing up quickly, and then we'll go through a little tour of what X58 can do for you. And of course, me as well. I love X58. Tech Yes citizens, I have negotiated a new 18% off coupon code on a Windows 10 Pro single end user license with today's video sponsor SCD Keys for as little as $13 using the coupon and the link in the description below. So we've taken off the South and Northbridge heat sinks on the x58 boards, and when you come into an x58 board, you always have to, in my opinion, clean off this heatsink paste or the dried up paste on this one, especially here, the Northbridge heatsink. So we've done that, we've taken it off. It was actually very difficult to get off because it's over the years it's become so hard. And now we're going to apply some new thermal paste after we clean this up and then put all the heat sinks back on. Surprisingly, with these pads here, the thermal pads, back in the day they used some really good ones, so they still are fine. We don't have to replace these, though if they are all real crumbled up, then you may wish to replace them with a cheap $1 pad off eBay or something like that. So we've now changed the thermal paste on the graphics card, the Northbridge heatsink, Southbridge heatsink, and the CPU cooler. And honestly, this is going to now run, in my opinion, better than brand new because the thermal paste that we're using has, I guess, thermal paste over the last 10 years has improved a lot since the stuff they used back in the day. So I'm pretty excited. Let's get this thing built. So we've now got this build torn apart, so we just finished building it, and then I realized that the RAM, it wasn't booting up properly, so I then took it out, and the BIOS is updated to the latest version. I actually did that when I was testing it, but one thing I didn't test was the other RAM slots. So what we got here is a problem where the slots on the right, only these two slots here are working, and these other 4 slots aren't recognizing memory, and this does happen from time to time with certain faulty boards. So essentially, this board in its current state is semi-faulty. But what I'm going to try and do now is take the CPU out, try and just, I guess, clean the pins and then clean the back of the CPU, see if that can make a difference, as well as cleaning the RAM slots out, and see if we can at least get dual channel to work. As at this stage, we've only got single channel, and that unfortunately will affect our FPS in games quite a bit. And that is what it's all about around Tech Yes City. We now have 3 sticks across those 3 DIMM slots in triple channel, and it is being recognized in the BIOS. So that was a new method I just quickly did now on the channel. And people always wonder, like, dude, how do you know all this stuff? How do you come up with these things? I just trial and error. I did not know if me putting a very sort of like stiff, soft brush across the pins with multi-purpose spray was going to work. I didn't know that, and I just tried something new, and it ended up bringing these 2 channels back to life here. So that's just the power of doing this kind of stuff. And my guess was it's either a very slight micro bend on the pins that happened, so we were stroking against the pins, and that helped, I guess, very softly alleviate a problem if they may have had that, or the tips of the pins themselves got a slight bit of corrosion over time. So either way, we've now got it all back up and working absolutely fine. This board is ready to finally be put back in the system, and it's good to go. Let's get it underway. So the build's up and running, finished. We've downloaded our games except for COD, which every time I try to install a Battle.net game, you've got to like delete the folders in the main folder and then scan the game and it re-downloads more. I wish platforms were honestly more like Steam and Uplay. Games just install when you copy them, paste them so easily. But anyway, rant aside, this PC we're going to run a preliminary benchmark without it overclocked, and then we're going to see the numbers, and then we're going to come back and start overclocking it and then re-benchmark it. And here we are back with overclocking our i7-9770 to 4.2 gigahertz. Now 4.2 gigahertz on x58 is pretty much a standard overclock, especially for these chips right here, which is the 32 nanometer. But one thing about the i7-970 is that it's pretty much considered on these 32 nanometer 6 cores, pretty much the garbage bin, and that it's the worst bin you can get compared to the x56 50 Xeons, for example, and also the i7-990Xs. So getting these to 4.2 gigahertz is relatively easy. You can do it in around 10 minutes. And also considering since we've got like real bottom of the barrel memory, we're just sticking with 1600 megahertz. Now, going past this, if you want to go to 4.4 gigahertz, you'd probably want some better cooling, but also some better memory too. But for what it's worth, this is a solid overclock, especially for some quick gains in games. I could probably spend some more time tuning the core voltage on the CPU, dropping that a little bit. But for what it's worth, let's get these benchmarks done. And here we are now finishing up with the benchmark. It's actually bright and early in the morning where I crashed out. You just get really tired sometimes. You're like, no, I'm going to bed, not spending any more time with these computers. And that's exactly what I did. I just crashed out and then woke up, was thundercharged, got into it, did the overclocking and stuff like that. So what we've got here before and after is really interesting because we can see with Warzone, we gained literally 50% FPS, going from 128 average FPS to 171, and the 1% and 0.1% lows responded accordingly. And then F1 2019 saw a pretty similar boost in that the average frames went from 115 to 154. Now comparing that to the 10900K, that scored a little bit more in F1 2019, and also in Warzone, it got a bit higher as well. But there wasn't like a massive difference. You could still play absolutely fine on 144 Hz monitor on both these titles. Now, one thing about Warzone 2, we did have to play it in safe mode for some reason. And it's just this game, I don't know what it is. It depends on the config and the way you set it up. Sometimes you just come into problems with it when you're installing it on new machines. I always seem to come into problems with it. I wish Battle.net would fix the copy paste of games, as we just said earlier in the video. But anyway, enough of that. Fortnite was a weird sort of mix here where we didn't actually gain much FPS at all. We went from 214 to 218, but then moving over to the 10900K, we gained a substantial amount of FPS, going up to 384. So this is the game that did expose a big difference between the latest and greatest and also the x58 system. Though the x58 system, for what it's worth, let's go over this because we were using 12 gigabytes of mediocre memory versus 32 gigabytes of CL16 3600. So I think I'm looking forward now, ever more so, to an x58 comparison and perhaps we'll just do an ultimate showdown in 2020. X58 versus X79 versus say the 2700X, 1600 AF, and then we'll throw the 10900K in there just for the limit on what's going to be imposed. Because now that I've got some really good DDR3 memory for this stuff, I want to see how high we can go. And of course, I want to get that Xeon, the X5675. Now that is pretty much the best CPU for X58 motherboards. So if you're going to get one of these motherboards and you pick, especially if you pick one up in a deal like we did on the channel here, you can get some really good value for money out of this system. Now, for me personally, like I said earlier in the video, I do resell X58 boards if I know they're really good quality, because people, even after 10 years, we can see the FPS here, even after 10 years, X58 is literally like one of the best investments you could have made in tech in your life. 10 years later, it's still going strong, it's still playing games absolutely fine, and a lot of those people out there that have owned this system for say 10 years, they're probably just like, their motherboard might go faulty over that time, and they're like, well, I'll just replace the motherboard. So you reselling a motherboard, especially a good X58 board, there is a good market out there for people who want to buy them. Not just people putting gaming to PCs together, price performance PCs like we do here on the channel. There's actually people who just want to replace their board. And so those X58 boards are still very attractive, as we saw with the results here. But also another thing, as I've mentioned in the past, overclocking this particular platform is a lot of fun, and there are a lot of other variables as opposed to the new stuff, especially with like Ryzen, Precision Boost Overdrive and Precision Boost. It just works so well that there's really not a whole lot of point in overclocking manually. And then we move over to Intel's side on Z490, and if you want to get a bit more out of that, you're going to see massive power consumption increases, and it's still just a matter of locking in CPU voltage and sync all cores. So overclocking, I feel like the older stuff, like X58, is a lot more fun, it's a lot more challenging, but once you get your head over it, it's actually big gains as well, as we saw here. You can get around 40%, 50% FPS, extra FPS, if you tune both the CPU and memory and even the Encore a lot more. So a lot of fun with today's rig. And in terms of the i7-970, worst case scenario for X58, you go grab that X5675 if you're serious about X58 and you want the best Xeon with the best overclocks. And surprisingly, the temps were okay too. Temps, power consumption, we were getting around 330 watts while we're playing Warzone, and the temperatures were around 70 degrees on both the GPU and the CPU. So that Noctua, that little Noctua cooler with the dual fans, pretty quiet and also doing a great job of handling this overclock at 4.2 gigahertz. But as we said before, overclocks, yeah, you could get a little bit more, but you're gonna spend a lot more time. And another thing is to, if I do sell this system, I'm not gonna be locking in a 4.2 even. I'd sell it maybe at 4 gigahertz because I know that's gonna work 24/7. I'm not gonna have any problems with the person saying, hey, my system's crashing, even if it's in summer, once in a blue moon or whatever. So 4 gigahertz is definitely gonna be 24/7 stable, but 4.2 is what most people can expect. And then 4.4, 4.5 is pretty much an enthusiast overclock on X58. Now, of course, the memory, if you want to really get the most out of this, get some decent memory. But even the 12 gigabytes we had here today in triple channel did do an amazing job. Though, with all that aside, if you guys enjoyed today's video, then you know what to do. Hit that like button for us, and also let us know in the comments section below what's your experiences with X58 in 2020. Have you come into one? Have you seen any deals on it? Or are you just all about going with that new Ryzen or even the new Z490 stuff? Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always, and let's get on to the question of the day. And this comes from Todor Tenkov, and they ask, I want to buy a Zeus P68X58 DE socket 1366 shield. I saw it in eBay, but do you know any other way? And I'm guessing they're talking about the IO shields that sometimes when you buy a board, you're gonna lose them. And the problem here is that if someone's reselling an IO shield, they're generally gonna want a bit of money for it, like at least 20 bucks, because they know someone needs that and they know they're prepared to pay that. And also at the same time, the person selling that has to make it worth their time. So IO shields is one of those things, there's no real other way around it, unfortunately, because they're all made unique to that motherboard. There's no real generic IO shield that you can get. I mean, there might be, but even then it's still gonna cost 10 bucks. and it's gonna look a lot messier. So in terms of if you lose the IO shield and you wanna replace it, unfortunately, you're pretty much gonna have to cough up the Piper on eBay. That's pretty much the only method that I know of personally. In terms of IO shields that I've got lying around here, I could take a look for you personally, as I've got so many of them over the years with all the motherboards that have been faulty and I've thrown out. I've managed to keep the IO shields around. So eventually I wanted to make like a Tech Yes City wall with IO shields. So that was the plan. But yeah, in terms of getting around that, there's no other way. Anyhow, I hope that answers that question. And if you guys have stayed this far and you're enjoying that content, then you know what to do. Make sure you hit that sub button, ring that bell to get this content as soon as it drops here at Tech Yes City. And I'll catch you in the next tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.